welcome or welcome back to the Autism 360 podcast, the 360 Method, a weekly podcast where we talk about everything Autism 360. Each week, I'll be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with team members, and talking all things mindset, as well as exploring relevant ideas that autism parents think about. So it's lovely to have you. I'm your host, Ella Bailey. I'm an Autism 360 veteran coach and explorer of all things parenting. So welcome to you, our lovely listener. We really care about your thoughts and experiences here on the Autism 360 program. So we would love to hear from you, whether you're a program member or not. We would love to hear from you. So please reach out, drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. We love listener feedback, and I've got some awesome questions coming up at the end that have been submitted through that email. So please do get in touch that way. Before we start on our topic today of meltdowns, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I live and work, and from where this podcast is being broadcast today, and give respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also want to mention that this podcast is not a substitute for medical or allied health advice. If you are worried about your child or yourself, please do reach out to your medical or allied health professional, or please reach out to us at Autism 360. We would love to be able to support you in your journey. So today, the most asked question, the most common struggle that parents come to the Autism 360 program with, or indeed to my own sessions with: meltdowns. Meltdown struggles, tantrums, dysregulation. How can we, essentially parents want to know, how do we prevent our child from having meltdowns? And I would say that my response to this is can be really boiled down into three main points. So we're going to chat about those. Then we're going to talk about your child's escalation cycle. We're going to talk about what your response should look like. And then we're going to answer some questions from parents talking about this particular topic. So meltdowns. Meltdowns are one of those things that are pretty ubiquitous across the parents that I've worked with here at the Autism 360 program. They look different for many different experiences of autism. Some kiddos totally explode outwards. Some kiddos internalize inwards, take it out on themselves internally. But all parents want to be able to improve their child's quality of life and do their best to manage meltdowns and dysregulation. So the first thing that I would say is that if your child was able to cope with what they were being asked, with the demands that were being placed on them, they would be. So it's not that your child is not wanting to do the best they can. It's not that your child is wanting to feel dysregulated or feel so out of control that they need to, have this explosive meltdown. It's a matter of can't cope, not won't cope. So I really want to establish that as our grounding principle for going forward while we're talking about meltdowns. So there are three main things that I would like you guys to take home when talking about autistic meltdown. So the first one is, once your child is in a full-blown meltdown, you have missed your opportunity of window to divert it. Your window of opportunity, rather, to divert that. That is the first and most important point. The second point, your response is the only thing you have control over in that moment. You don't have control over your kiddo. You only have control over yourself and what you do to respond to that meltdown. And then the third one is tune into and manage your own escalations. So something that I see a lot is parents who are saying to me, oh, I want to reduce meltdowns, or it's so stressful when my kid has a meltdown and that sort of thing. And the thing is, it's meant to be. Those signals that your child is sending to you are of extreme distress. And as parents and caregivers, we're biologically primed to find that sort of stimuli extremely aversive. That's why it's so hard to ignore a baby crying, right? Because over, millions and millions of years, infant children and young developing children have honed the skills of attracting a caregiver's attention when they're dysregulated, because that's a survival strategy for them. So we, in that situation, are biologically primed to become escalated and dysregulated in our own right. So knowing that about the situation, what are you doing to manage your own escalation so that you can be there to support your child? It's totally fine to be escalated. Biologically speaking, you should be being escalated by your child having that sort of struggle. But knowing that about the situation, what are you doing to prevent it and to support yourself so that you can support your child? So let's go into a little bit more detail about that window of opportunity for diverting meltdowns. So what is key here is to understand that once your child is in a full-blown meltdown state, they are in a stage of their escalation cycle where their capacity to hear and process language, to be able to be responsive to communication of any form, or even to think sort of quote unquote rationally, or reason themselves out of this situation, is totally gone. And the reason for that is really biological and very neurochemical. So the reason that is because their body is in full blown fight or flight. And what that actually does is cuts out a lot of the activation of your prefrontal cortex, brings all the blood flow, all the neurochemical activation, all the electricity back down into the brain stem. So that's kind of oldest part, the earliest developing part of the brain, and that's not a rational, communication-driven part of the brain. That's a really kind of primal part of the brain. They're not going to be able to hear you. They're not going to be able to be responsive or rationalize with you. And I mean, as a parent of a child who has meltdowns, you already know that, right? You already know that they can't hear you. You've tried, etc. And so that is why once your child is already in full-blown meltdown, your window is closed. Your window to divert that meltdown is closed. And while your child is in peak escalation, you should be focusing on safety. You can't stop, you don't have control over where that child is at with their escalation. All you can do is keep them safe while they're processing these really big feelings that they're having. You need to notify whomever it is that's necessary to keep that person who's having the meltdown safe, that child who's having the meltdown safe. And if needed, you need to keep the people around them safe by asking them to exit, giving your child space, and giving you the space and support that you need to support your child while they're having that meltdown. So that's what I would say is the first thing that I want to bring your attention to while we're talking about meltdowns. So let's talk about our kiddos' escalation cycle. And by the way, I'm so sorry if you can hear my dog snoring in the background. That's just our nice soothing little background noise. You're welcome for that. So let's talk about our escalation cycle. Let's think about our escalation cycle as sort of like a mountain with a curved top that on one side has a little gully, right? So we're starting on a nice even plane. That's our calm, regulated state. Then as we start to go up into the foothills of the mountain, that's our trigger point. That's the either internal or external stimuli that starts a person towards the summit of that mountain, the summit of the mountain being the meltdown. Right? So when they're calm, we can, or, to bring on that calmness, that's when we're sort of, we've got those established routines and expectations. We've planned ahead really well. We're giving that kid their their space, their independence, they're thriving, right? And then they come to the foothill. They get their trigger. We are there's something either internal or external that is changing them from that calm state up into a state of agitation. Right? So when our child is getting agitated, they're going to be showing us signs that they are no longer in that calm state. And so you might notice that they start to fidget or stim more. You might notice that they start to walk on their toes when they don't normally walk on their toes. You might notice that they are more snappy than usual, that they are more short-tempered or aren't able to tolerate things that they're usually able to tolerate. They're your signs of agitation, right? So when they're in that stage, what we need to do is show empathy, right? We need to recognize that they are in a state of agitation. This is our really prime window for diverting from a meltdown. So we use start rather than stop directions. So instead of saying stop stimming, which we would never do anyway, we don't want to stop a child from stimming to regulate themselves, but instead of saying, oh, stop, I don't know, whatever it might be, walking on your toes, we would say something like, hey, do you want to walk over to your crash mat? Hey, let's start swinging, so that what we're doing is giving them that positive instruction of something they can do to regulate themselves, and in doing so we're swerving and hopefully de-escalating from going up towards that peak of a full-blown meltdown. Right, we're continuing on, say that didn't work, we're continuing on up the mountain towards the peak meltdown phase. After agitation comes escalation, right? That's when you can tell your kiddo is on the way, you can tell that they're not coping, they might start to, every child's signals are different, and that's something that as parents and carers of kiddos who struggle with this sort of thing, we need to be really aware of the signals of each of these stages of the escalation cycle. So I would say, agitation is when okay, if I don't do something about this imminently, we're gonna go right over the top there into a full-blown meltdown. And often one of the most common ones that I see parents coming to me with is my kiddo having meltdowns in like a Westfield or a busy place. The Easter show, that's a big one. And so I think you can see your kiddo getting escalated. They're running around, they're frantic, their respiratory rates might be going up, they're sweating, they're getting hyperactive. Sometimes it can look like that. So we need to provide that kiddo with the space and time and resources that they need to be able to prevent them from going into full-blown meltdown. So what that might look like is you're at the Easter show, your kiddo's gone from calm to triggered by all the noise and the lights and the people to super agitated, not able to concentrate on where they're walking, not able to listen to instructions, to escalated, getting really hyperactive and frantic, feeling really overstimulated. And if we can do something like find a quiet space to bring down the sensory input, to slow down their body systems, for them to co-regulate with you, you might speak in a low, slow voice to bring down their escalation somatic symptoms, their bodily symptoms. That is going to be your most powerful tool in preventing that child from going over the edge into full-blown meltdown, not able to cope with what they're being asked to cope with in the environment. So say, the worst did happen, you weren't able to play, you weren't able to find a quiet space to be able to help your child to regulate. What do you need to do? As I've said, there's nothing that you can do in the moment to make that child calm down any more quickly than they're going to anyway. You need to give that child a safe space to be able to process those emotions in whatever the way that their body is going to going to allow them to do that. And this is the time when we are looking at our responses and we're managing our own escalation. And oftentimes, this is when I see parents who are really escalated, who aren't kind of able to actively engage in managing their own responses, actually escalating their child further. This is when I see parents doing things like, oh, please, just be quiet, keep going, moving their child along because they're so stressed out themselves. And that is, without a doubt, only going to make the meltdown go longer, harder, more intense. What you need to do is give your child a safe space and environment that is calm in order to calm themselves down. Generally, we're kind of coming over the other edge of the escalation cycle mountain now. We're coming down the other side into our de-escalation mode. All meltdowns will at some point start naturally to de-escalate naturally once a whole bunch of the hormone floods that have been raging through your kiddo's body have started to become naturally depleted. Right, so when they go into a meltdown, when they're in that peak of their escalation cycle, they get this rush of adrenaline and cortisol. But those endocrine system cascades, those hormones, they only last for so long. They're only going to keep our kiddo having enough energy to, be maintaining that meltdown for a certain amount of time. And then naturally, as those hormones become depleted in the system, they're going to be replaced by soothing, depressive hormones, a cascade of de-escalation, right? So we're coming over the top of our mountain and coming into the de-escalation phase of the escalation cycle. So we really want to monitor safety continuously while we're in this situation. There it can be, and I'm sure that parents have seen this as well. There can be lots of times where your kiddo has come up through their peak. You think they're starting to de-escalate, and then something sets them off again. They're doing a whole mountain range of escalation cycles, and so we want to be able to help our kids follow through that whole flow of de-escalation to come back to that calm baseline. So, monitoring safety. So, say your child starts to come down from that full-blown meltdown. We are not pressuring them to get themselves up and ready to go again. We are not getting them to move. We're not introducing stimuli. We're keeping things really calm and positive. We're not enforcing time deadlines. We're just letting everything go so that we can be there with our child to support them while they are coming down from their really heightened meltdown stakes. Allow time and space for them to do that, and also start to think about in this moment, what happened here? While it's really fresh in your mind, what happened here? How could I have picked up better on my child's escalation cues earlier so that we didn't have to go through this really stressful moment? Right, so what happens after your de-escalation is that kids will go into what's called your post-escalation depletion stage. So that's when, and lots of people say that they see this with their young toddlers, either neurotypical or neurodivergent. They've had this big outburst, this big meltdown, this big moment of dysregulation, and then they get exhausted, they're tired, they're lethargic, they might get weepy, and they just feel sad. It is it's such a big expenditure, a big expensive, bodily speaking, expensive episode that they've just been through. And so they're going to come into this moment of, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, I'm lethargic, and I'm not feeling good about what's happened. And I just want to state that this is not the time to talk to your child about their meltdown. This is not the time. Don't do it. It's very tempting, right? Because it feels like they're sort of coming back to you after that moment. This isn't the time. All we want to do during this kind of post-escalation depletion is to ready them to bring themselves back to baseline, whatever that might look like. Right, so let's use our Easter show example. Here I'm talking about the Sydney Easter show. They are, they've had this big meltdown. We've been able to bring them through the de-escalation phase, And instead of getting them to get up and move around or anything, what we're doing is we're just talking to them about what they feel like they might want to do, what feels doable, do they want to go home, are they hungry. I'm not saying, fire all these questions at them. I'm just saying helping them to return to that established routine and expectation that they already had is what we're aiming for in this phase. And that's hopefully going to bring us back up out of our little gully into that plateau, recovery and return to our calm baseline. So we are, once we've come through that de-escalation phase, we're then going into the dip of that post dysregulation depletion. We are not talking about what's happened. We're not dissecting the behavior or anything like that. All we're doing is focusing on bringing things back to baseline, reestablishing the routine, and hopefully moving that kiddo on from their dysregulated moment. So that's the details of the escalation cycle, what we can do in each phase to support our child who is struggling with that, and also what we need to do in those phases. And I think that kind of leads me really nicely onto more details about my second point, which is our response. Our children are their own people. They have their own free will. And as parents of neurodivergent children know, they're going to do what they're going to do. And we can't control that. The only thing that we can control is how we respond. All right. So, and just like I mentioned before, when we're seeing parents try to get their children to push through the dysregulation, trying to continue placing the demand that is causing the dysregulation, that's when we see a child continue to escalate, turn to, self-injurious behaviors, really show those signs of frustration that are so unhelpful for our children. And so I think what is key here is knowing how you feel when your child is melting down so that in the moment you can keep a cool head. What is key is that we do not lose our cool. And I know that I'm constantly coming back to this. I talk about it in podcasts all the time. But if there's one thing that I try to get parents to take away from their time with me in the program, it is that almost more important than any skill that you can teach your child is you developing the skill of keeping your cool when your child is escalated, whatever that might look like. That is the most important and deciding factor in how intensive that meltdown is going to be. So we've got something that I think not a lot of parents think about in terms of their own escalation is, have you thought about your own sensory needs in that moment? We're primed biologically to find screaming and crying, especially of our children, really stressful. So what are you doing to counteract that? That stressful stimuli, we are setting ourselves up to struggle if we don't preempt that, right? So do you have your own strategies to calm your nervous system? Do you have your own, stress management tools that you can use in the moment? So something that I had some really good success with one of my parents here on the program was she herself found that she had a lot of auditory sensitivities that were really triggered when her kiddo was having a meltdown. And I kind of had a look around to see what tools might be available for her. And we ended up stumbling across a couple of different brands of earbuds that didn't stop the sound coming in. There was nothing unsafe going on in terms of blocking our children out or whatever. But what it did do was reduce the decibels by a certain amount so that she was able to retain calmness and not be triggered by that auditory sensitivity. We just lowered the decibels by a certain amount so that she felt like she could cope if and when that sound landscape was going to be something that was triggering to her. There are also headphones out there that can block out just certain frequencies of sound so that you know, okay, I have this particular, I don't know, this particular stressful auditory stimuli, and I have my headphones tuned in to block that out so that I'm managing my own arousal so that I then have the opportunity to support my child better, no matter what stage they're at the escalation cycle, but particularly when they're, at that peak of their escalation cycle. So, I mean, I guess I would say give yourselves and your kiddos a little bit of grace on this one. Unfortunately, the world we live in can be extra challenging for a kiddo who isn't neurotypical. And so sometimes there's not a lot we can do to manage the environment that they're in, to reduce the stresses that are going to be dysregulating to them. What we can do is do a really good job of setting them up for success with preparation, do a good job of knowing them well so that we can read their signals of escalation no matter where they're at in their regulatory cycle, and do a really good job of providing a safe space for them to work through whatever big feelings they're having and then to re-regulate afterwards. So I hope that's helpful. As always, please just get in touch when you have time to think about this. If you have any questions, you know where to email. I wanted to answer a question that came in to hello@autism360.com from Swati in Logan in the Gold Coast. Asks, what do I do when my child has a meltdown in the supermarket? I feel like everyone is staring at me and all I want to do is get out of there. Oh my gosh, Swati, I totally get that. I know so many parents who find that just a really horrible situation, and I don't think that there's unfortunately any easy way to kind of problem solve this without kind of asking further questions. But what I would say is clearly there's something about, that situation. If it's really predictable that every time you go into the supermarket, your child has a meltdown, there's something about that environment that's super dysregulating for your child that you need to kind of be a bit of a detective and problem solve so that you can figure out what the trigger is. It's taking him from that calm baseline up into his agitation cycle mountain. If we can eliminate that trigger, find some sort of tool to help him manage that trigger, we're going to do a much better job at getting in and out of the supermarket without a meltdown in the toilet paper aisle. So, Swati, put your detective hat on, figure out what is it about this situation. It could be that it's just really visually overstimulating. It could be there's a noise that your child can hear in that supermarket context that we aren't aware of that's extremely aversive and he's not coping. It could be, we've accidentally reinforced the pattern that every time he goes in, he gets a lollipop that sometimes, that the behavior is being reinforced by that and he's getting dysregulated. So there could be a bunch of reasons. We need to take a good look at what's going on there and see what it is that's triggering that and put in place a strategy to help your child cope better with that. And there's lots of ways that could look like. Get in touch with, if you're on the program, ask your coach about it. If not, you can please feel free to email in more details. That would be great. Hopefully I can give you some more helpful answers. But I hope that helps, Swati. It's always great to hear from people who kind of reach out and let us know that we've been helpful or whatever it might be. So thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been great to be able to chat about this particular topic that I know affects a whole range of individuals who are either on the autism spectrum or supporting somebody on the autism spectrum. So I can't wait to chat with you again next week about another topic relevant to autism parenting and the Autism 360 program. I will see you there, and until then, think 360.